Good evening. Welcome to Out of Many, a conversation series featuring National Academicians participating in our digital annual exhibition, E Pluribus, Out of Many, curated by Dr. Kelli Morgan. I'm Adrienne Elise Tarver, the Director of Programs here at the National Academy of Design. If you haven't yet explored the show, please do so. We're going to drop the link in the chat function. So that is outofmany.nationalacademy.org. The exhibition contends with the challenge of creating a virtual exhibition, not just during a waning pandemic, not just amongst social upheaval and political turmoil, but also amongst a group of artists and architects who are as different as they are interesting. What new features? E Pluribus features over 100 academicians and asks the question, what new features can be created if Americans stop pursuing the ideal of national unity and accept our reality as an incongruent collective? Tonight, artist Sangram Majumdar joins E Pluribus curator Dr. Kelli Morgan in conversation. Please join us after the conversation for a live Q&A with Sangram and Kelli. There's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the conversation, you can drop your questions in there, and I will make sure that Sangram and Kelli hear those questions at the end of the program. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kelli Morgan. Dr. Morgan is the newly appointed inaugural director of curatorial studies and professor of the practice and history of art and architecture at Tufts University in Boston. She is a curator, educator, and social justice activist who specializes in American art and visual culture, and her scholarly commitment to the investigation of anti-Blackness within those fields has demonstrated how traditional art history and museum practice work specifically to uphold white supremacy. Dr. Morgan has held curatorial positions at the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields, the Birmingham Museum of Art, and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. She has held teaching positions at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University, Wayne State University, and the University of Michigan, where she merged the classroom and museum gallery to create various anti-racist paradigms for how curators can actively address the complexities of traditional art history, community engagement, and scholarly innovation. In 2014, Morgan was awarded a dissertation fellowship from the Ford Foundation and earned her PhD in Afro-American Studies and a graduate certificate in Public History Museum Studies from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2017. Hi, Kelli. Thanks for joining us. Oh, I think you're muted. Sorry.
All the time, right? You think like a year and a half in, like I would get that together.
No, of course not. We still have to have these little tech things. That's part of the charm of Zoom, right?
It's so funny. Oh my God, but thank you for having me. It's good to be here, and I'm so excited to talk to Sangram tonight too. So I will begin by actually reading Sangram's bio and introducing him to our audience tonight. So born in Kolkata, India, Majumdar has an MFA from Indiana University and a BFA from RISD. Recent solo exhibition venues include Gary, New York, Stephen Harvey, two different people. Stephen Harvey Fine Art Projects, New York, and Asia Society Texas Center. Recent selected group exhibition venues include Shoshana Wayne Gallery in LA, The Landing in LA, and James Cohen Gallery in New York. Selected awards include a New York Foundation for the Arts Grant in Painting, an American Academy of Arts and Letters Purchase Award, residencies at the McDowell Colony in Yaddo, a Sharp Studio Space Grant, and a MICA Trustees Award for Excellence in Teaching. His work has been reviewed in Art Forum, the Brooklyn Rail, Hyperallergic, among others, and he's an assistant professor of painting and drawing at the University of Washington. Majumdar lives and works in Seattle, Washington. So please help me in welcoming Sangram Majumdar to our conversation tonight. Hi, Sangram, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I am good. I look tired. Super tired. I was so excited, that you were available to do what it is. and be in conversation tonight, because your piece Becoming One was really, it was another like standout, one of the favorite pieces, when I was going through the submissions. And a lot of it was because like looking at it and reading your supplemental materials, I was like, oh, this is me, right? This is like everything that's going on in my life right now. And it really does give that collage like feel, of connecting. Like I always say, we exist in the gray, right? We don't really exist.
Yeah.
We like our binaries, but the binaries don't technically like exist. We're constantly pulling pieces, from so many areas around us, from so many people around us, from so many experiences, both past and present, and maybe even future too, right? To create ourselves. And I think the work really does super communicate that, while the show is kind of looking at, this moment of disunity, right? And extreme polarization. So I wanted to kind of start with this work, and we can talk about that, and then we can go into some of your other work. Like you can kind of talk to folks about how you came, right, to working in this style.
Yeah, just maybe to start, I'll just say thanks for weaving me into this conversation. You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm always paranoid that I'm talking and people can't hear me on Zoom, especially when I have my headphones on. And yeah, I think, did you want me to talk about that specific piece as a just kind of a starting point, or
just, yeah, whatever. You could do that. You could talk more broadly and like, work into the piece, whatever you're comfortable.
Well, I think something you said just a little while ago, that you felt that the painting, like you connected to the painting directly. And like, this is what, like it felt like it was your painting in a way, like it kind of mirrored your experience. I think that's really exciting for me to hear that, because I think, especially in terms of how I work, and like we have our lives, we do all the things that we all do, and then for different types of creative pursuits, me being a painter, I go into the studio, and then you come out, and then something happens through that, in that whatever happens in that studio, right? And then you do something, and it takes, for me anyway, it takes me a while to have a sense of like what I'm thinking. I often feel like my paintings are slightly ahead of me. Whatever plans I might have, they're great, but the plans, a friend of mine once said, your painting doesn't really care what your plans are, Well, because I remember I was complaining to her, like, well, I had this plan, I was going to do this, and she was like, well, your painting doesn't care about your plans. I'm like, yeah, good point. So you do something, and then, but to hear that it is communicating on a certain wavelength that I was thinking about in some ways is really exciting, because I think we spoke briefly yesterday, I know, but one thing I remember mentioning to you is that I feel like every few years something pivots or something shifts in my work, and this group of paintings that, like the painting that you showed, Becoming One, and some related paintings, are really kind of both a culmination and a re-honing in on certain ideas, and both in a broader sense, but also pictorial ideas that relate to the figure, and like where things are coming together in a way that is really exciting for me. I've always been somebody who, when they work, I take things out when they don't feel, when I don't connect with them. I don't keep things, I don't follow paths just because it makes sense, I guess, stylistically or imagistically. So because of that, certain threads of my work have been present, and then some things were gone, like I wasn't working directly with the figure for a while. And really about 4 years ago, things kind of started to recombine in a way that felt like it was hitting the targets, hitting the markers that felt meaningful to me. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I suppose, that when it's exciting when something feels relevant to me as a maker is also feeling relevant to a viewer.
Yeah, no, totally. I was like, even from just like I said again, your supplemental materials, and people can go on the website and see the
Right.
supplemental materials that I'm referencing right now. So
Yeah.
from your daughter's shoe, to the sort of what do you call it, anthropological, kind of dig, of the human skeleton, and then just like the walk sign, right, that we all have to interact with at some point,
Right.
particularly living on the coast. And it was like these three seemingly like disparate things, coming together. And I like the, like the geometric pattern that you used there too, like totally did like the DNA thing, for me. So I was just like, it's like how we like kind of come, because I mean, and you talk to somebody, I'm a very spiritual person, but you talk to people nowadays, and they're just like, what is happening? And it's like, it's kind of human evolution that's happening right now. We're in the midst of like what I think is like a larger shift, and internally, at least I know I do, like I totally kind of feel that shift, going on internally. And the painting just really, like sometimes, like I was telling you last night, right? It's like, I'm so envious of artists sometimes because you have this really wonderful skill, gift, training, right? To make the intangible tangible. And so looking at that work, and I was just like, this is like how I would describe myself to someone right now. Whereas like, I don't have the language, so it's like where language sort of fails, I think art does more, right, than language a lot of times too. But it's like that tangibility, of this like weaving and collaging and painting, that you're doing that I find just like phenomenal.
Thank you. I mean, I think thinking about the different access points or interest points that I have as a painter, there's a set of kind of interests that I think come into my studio that are reflexive of the vocabulary of painting, whether it's Western or Eastern or anything in between. Like paintings make people think of paintings, etc. But then there's so much other stuff, like the things, like something you see on the way to the grocery store, or like crossing the street, or hearing, remembering, like for example, like, I mean, well, of course, now I'm in the Pacific Northwest, so the rain is such a present element here that I haven't fully investigated or experienced, but everyone says it's coming. So I'll say, all right. But rain has all these kind of associations for me from my childhood in India. So I think all these different kind of markers that you're referring to are really a way for me to bring things into the studio, different disparate things that feel related to me, that may not relate to each other, but maybe they can relate within the painting. Maybe they can come together in some kind of composite or some kind of a new structure that's getting built, whether you think of it as a dimensional collage or otherwise. And I think this idea of intangibility, I think, is something I'm definitely interested in as somebody who's interested in images, and images are such, we read images, we call them things, we name, the idea of naming something. And that to me has always been interesting, is how do you make paintings that both, where you can have something that you can name, and that's one way of knowing something, like you look at it and you know what it is, but also other ways of knowing, which is like touch base, the fact that, like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you are looking for something on your, I don't know, bedstand, or like on a table next to you, you touch it, because it's there. But you're not really looking because you don't really want to open your eyes at that, it's still it's early to wake up, like the alarm is going off, like, and then, so I kind of like those things. I guess those are some things I think about, in my paintings,
Yeah, I think that's so apt, right? Because I think we're learning that, you know, how our other senses function, you know, in conjunction with seeing, particularly with mask, you know. So now with the mask on,
Yeah.
and you're like, what did you say? Say that again, you know, and people are like, oh, these stupid masks. And it's like, yeah, because we read lips way more than we actually hear what people are saying, right? And it's like, now that we can't see people's mouths moving, you know, that is, what is it? It's like a disconnect, you know. And I think it's that's something else that's like put us in this interesting place of having to relearn, you know, how to move through the world. You know, which is, I thought you know, the opportunity, you know, to do this, this show and to like engage with so many artists around that was like, I was like, it's so like kind of on point, you know. And so to segue, because I know you have slides, so I want you to walk, you know, walk through those to see, because I want people to really see like the progression, you know, from like, and we're actually going to go backwards, but, but you know, kind of from where you are now, you know, with Becoming Two, which I also like. And then kind of going back, because when I was looking at some of your older work, and I hope this isn't offensive, but it's so Duchampian to me. It's so like new descending a staircase. I think the historian in me, like, that was like the first thing that I thought about visually, right, as an art historian. You know, that stuck out to me, and like that sort of like fractured figure. And I know you're doing a lot more, right, than Duchamp, but the initial, I think, like visual register, you know, for me, some of the older paintings was Duchamp.
Well, I think, you know, with like, you know, when you kind of, I mean, you kind of hinted at that earlier with the walk sign, like I think one of the reasons I kind of have been working with the figure more as a signpost, right, is because it has all these access points to history, both in art and otherwise, you know, as well as kind of contemporary kind of signage, right? Whether it's exit sign, etc. That there are these callbacks or echoes that happen with the sign. And I think the other part of that is maybe one thing I can say is this idea of how do you put a body. You said something a couple minutes ago about the phrase, how do you put a body together, which I really liked. And I feel like that's an active question for me. You know, how do you present something that even has built-in inconsistencies or ambivalences, right? Like wanting to both be present but not seen, you know, or the ambivalence that might reside in wanting to be in two places at once, or feeling pulled in multiple directions at once, or feeling, you know, the external versus external pressures versus internal drives. So I think for myself, you know, part of it being biographical, but also just as the, you know, like, and I don't think this is unique to me. I think most people go through their lives juggling a lot of stuff. But there's something about like, well, how do you honor that incongruity, but at the same time creating something that arrives simultaneously? You know, so there's like a clarity and directness and what's the word I want to use? Like immediacy to the presentation of the painting, how the painting presents itself, and then it can kind of unweave or unhinge or break apart, and you know, and then the slow read can happen over time. You know, I think the thing that I also think a lot about, not so much, I mean Duchamp is obviously there, but more in terms of the idea of like missing information, Like that's something I'm really interested in, how our, whether it's just the idea of kind of the classic idea of the kind of Gestalt theory of like, you know, that we kind of, you know, we make sense of the world even though there are gaps within it, you know, a dotted line versus a continuous line. But also, I think purely in terms of art, so much of art and so much of, but even like lived life, like it's like about things that are missing, things that are taken away, you know, a house going up while another house is coming down, and, you know, foundations shifting, and in terms of art, one of the things I've always loved is when you go to look at historical art, whether it's in a cave or in a church, is like huge chunks are missing, but our eyes kind of hold it together. So for me, then I'm interested in how to visualize something, the missing space alongside the recognizable aspects of imagery. With, you know.
I love that, particularly like you were saying, like being present but not being seen, right? Like that's, you know, I feel like that's been my life for the last probably like 3-4 years. Oh my God. You know, and that like Ralph Ellison, you know, Invisible Man,
right,
you know, kind of way, you know, where, and I think that's actually happening, like even what you were just saying about the foundation and shifting, like that's what's happening, you know, just around the world, you know, the foundation is shifting drastically. Whether you're talking about climate change or capitalism or, you know, whatever, right? Like patriarchy, like all of the things. It is completely, you know, like moving, you know, up under our feet while we're moving at the same time, you know, so then the gaps are opening up in places that certain groups of people never thought gaps would ever be.
Right, right.
And it's like watching people try to understand that in real time, you know.
Well, there's a lot of anxiety involved in acknowledging incongruities in shared experiences, and you know, it'd be much easier if everyone felt the same way about everything. Wouldn't that be the most boring universe ever?
Oh my God. But you know what's fascinating about that? I think is like in our contemporary moment, right, where we're starting to see that like even the people that we thought did, you know, think the same as we do, or like believe in the same things, like seeing that limitation, right, seeing where those beliefs kind of either they were never there in the first place, right, or they were very performative, you know, or they stopped, you know, after a certain point, or like once, you know, privilege gets challenged, you know, those beliefs kind of go, you know, they're swept under the rug, or kind of, you know, or like, you know, walked, you know, kind of abandoned is the word I'm looking for, you know, in a way, and you're just like, God, I thought I knew that person, you know, you know, or I thought we were really close.
Well, I think you're pointing to something that I find, I think what that is for me, the way I see that is that that no one is just one thing all the time, right? Like there's a complexity to experience and meaning, and you know, I mean, you know, within the range of somebody's lived life, there's gray areas, and you know, one day you can feel one way, and the other day it can be like, well, actually, I don't know, like, and which I think for me is exciting if you acknowledge, like, oh, like you're willing to kind of reconsider your reference points, right? I think for me, in terms of one way I kind of think about that in terms of my work is, at least, I mean, I feel like I'm doing that a lot as a teacher, first of all, like having to reconsider my reference points while having a certain thread that I'm running, that I'm, you know, like okay, we're on this train, but if you want to switch cars, like, okay, well, you can go to the next car. I know you don't have a ticket, but you can go there. But we're staying on the train. We're not getting on a helicopter. So I think for
Right.
me, it's like, I'm like, I think it goes to the idea of a plan. Like you come in, you
Mhm.
do something over the course of a few hours in a studio, you have a thought, the next day you come in, maybe that thought still feels tangible and you can jump on it. But other times I feel like, oh, maybe not, or maybe that's enough,
Mhm.
like maybe that was it. Maybe there it doesn't need to be extended forward anymore. So that's one thing. That's another aspect to how I suppose where I am in my work is I'm willing to kind of allow fragments to exist in the painting
Mhm.
for a while, knowing that eventually I'll find a way to resolve those thoughts. But
Mhm.
for the time being, I try to keep paintings open. Like a lot of the paintings, I think you skipped through, or you showed that previous one, Becoming Two, and some related works. A lot of them are done at the same time within the course. I mean, the paintings that are in this presentation that are really done, it's like late 2020 through 2021, like
Okay.
like May,
Mhm.
basically before I moved.
Okay.
And so they're also non-linear in the way one thing's starting, another thing's ending. There isn't
Mhm.
really a beginning and like in a direct sense.
Mhm.
So if anything, there's a rollover and there's a carryover of thoughts from one idea to another, or one painting to another. And this kind of migratory condition, like you started a thought in one painting, and then you're like, well, maybe I don't want to do that, and then that new thought actually becomes a different painting.
Mhm.
um, in the past I used to a lot like just stay with the same painting and just beat it to death, it seems like, and something would come out of it, but what I would
Uh-huh.
lose, but I would also lose something. And it's like a age old problem with,
Yeah.
like how do you balance loss and what did you lose and what did you gain? And I think
Mhm.
for me, more and more, I'm much more present in the initial aspects of my painting.
Mhm.
And I don't see it as just I guess the base layer. I think
Yeah.
that could be a viable decision that could live alongside something from the past. Just like you could walk down the street and see a house that like 100 years old, right next to somebody who bought the building, tore it
Yeah.
down, put another $4 million, and just made a
Mhm.
monstrosity, and now people have to live with it next to
Mhm.
this other house. So
Yeah.
I feel like, but that kind of visual collage is everywhere in our lives, right? And it causes kind of friction and anxiety, and it's not, maybe not, it kind of pushes against our senses of taste and decorum, or what and I
Totally. And
kind
I
of
think
want that in my
identity.
paintings.
I think like knowing who we are in the
Yeah,
world, right?
yeah,
Like how not necessarily how we identify, in terms of race, class, right,
yeah,
sexuality,
yeah,
gender, but just
yeah.
like literally knowing like where we are, kind of where we belong.
Right, right.
And when yeah, and like when that happens, then that's another thing I think that's happening like we're experiencing collectively, like as Americans,
Yeah,
where that like that thing that made me, American working class, or
right.
middle class or whatever. It's like all of that stuff is shifting,
Yeah,
so then it's like, well, now who am I, right? Or how do I think, kind of come into understand the way that like like the jobs we do, the people we know, right? Like the stores we go to, even like the food that we
yeah,
eat, really
yeah,
informs how we understand ourselves. So when that stuff not just shifts, but it's, in certain cases was literally eradicated, so then what does it mean? Then you have to kind of start over, kind of even coming back to your paintings, right? Like starting over, having to rebuild this new thing that didn't exist in your mind, about yourself
right,
prior to.
right, right. Yeah, I feel like um, I think if I kind of track back to kind of the the key points in my work as my work has developed, I feel like um, there's always been some kind of a major shift in my life that has paralleled the shift in the work. you know,
Mm.
and yeah, and I feel like that's, like you said, like the ground has to feel like it shifts underneath you. For you have, in order, so you can't just go on doing the same thing, you know. Like I guess one of the things I guess I can quickly say is the work prior to this work, like the work where I was working with the figure as kind of a walking figure sign, and then the kind of the hands. I had been doing these kind of more staged spaces, and they were fairly full. Like there was a lot. There was a lot in those paintings, and like 2016 had, and I just you know all the things that happened in 2016 post-election. I just remember coming into the studio and realizing that I just like I couldn't handle all that activity in the paintings. I needed to like empty, like I needed to take things out. So I did a few paintings that literally I emptied out the painting, that took things away. And I think in retrospect, when I look back, I've been thinking that, well, maybe I was creating a new space for myself. You know, like you open up the painting, you take everything out, literally and metaphorically. You're saying, well, what's going to come in next, right? So those paintings that were empty, quote unquote, I didn't do too many of them. I think there was like 3 of them or 4 at the most. But I think it's what allowed me to reimagine, to bring the figure back in a way. I couldn't have done it in the work from like 2015. It just didn't. I would not have known how to do that. So literally, I had to clean their house, clean the room. I had to do some, before I could decide. Well, I got to throw things away before I can bring things in. You can't have 5 couches in the same house.
And then sometimes even I think in that moment too, like throwing away stuff that we didn't necessarily even know, right? Or maybe well, maybe some people didn't know, right? Needed to be thrown out. Angelique, can you go back a couple of slides? Keep going.
I think I know which one you're gonna stop on.
Keep going.
That one, right? No.
That one is this one. This one.
Oh, okay.
This one and the one after. So this one is really, I just like, talk to me about the Christmas trees, right? Like pattern, because this gives me, so we're talking about taking things out, but it also gives me that like looking back, living in the present and looking forward simultaneously. Right? So like living in that time space continuum, if that makes sense. And how we, like the evolution, right? So the figure actually does become, like comes into fuller fruition, as you move to the right of the canvas. But then it's all this stuff going on in the background. And again, just like me being able to be like, oh, right. Is that painted on? Or was it like a pattern that you...
It's all painted.
Okay.
It's quite straightforward in that sense.
Okay.
It's paint on canvas kind of deal. I guess I think like when you were talking like towards the beginning and you were asking about the different places the imagery comes from, right? Both whether it's kind of my personal life versus thinking about more public imagery or historical references, etc. This was really kind of pulled together from it's my daughter's like pajamas, her night pajamas, and I just thought it would be the most ridiculous thing to make a painting of that because it's just so dumb. It's like, and it's so on the nose, and it's just so saccharine, and it could be so, it could fail so miserably, and if it failed, it would just be, it's like, it's like, it just seems like a bad idea, but that's if I have my art hat on, right? But it's also, but I was like, but these are such cool pajamas. I want to paint them, So I borrowed the pajamas and brought them into my studio because she had grown out of them, and
Mhm.
there they lived. And I think they're still folded up in my studio somewhere. You know,
Okay.
I don't think she knows that.
That's
Now
sweet.
she does. She probably just heard me. So I think sometimes it's that, like finding an excuse. Like for me, painting is a lot of things, but sometimes painting, I can be really serious, but there's other aspects, right, of our experiences. Like, we're not one way to everybody all the time.
Right.
And I've been thinking a lot about how do you bring different aspects of yourself into the painting. Like for me, and painting has a certain, I don't know, I guess because of what it is. It's serious, it's like it's art with a capital A and all of those things. And I don't know, like finding a way to kind of like drop it a little bit and to bring something in that maybe makes me laugh or I think is like, makes me uneasy. And I like that level. I want to do something in the paintings where I'm not really sure if it was a good decision or not. Like, you know what I mean? Like, on one level, I know I can pull it together, but on another level, I wasn't like, is this a bad idea? Like, I don't know. So you just have to do it. I could have stayed with the good idea or the idea I knew it would work. But for me, it's like when I move from a painting to another painting, I think the curiosity just is like drives the boat majority of the time. Like, what would happen? What would happen if I did this? Is really kind of a big question. But obviously within certain parameters, like I'm kind of using certain markers to kind of create a visual and subliminal link from painting to painting, which then opens up the possibility, at least for me, to do, sometimes dumb things, maybe. I don't know.
I like that freedom. Yeah, I like that freedom, you know what I mean? And like that flexibility. And just like you said, the grayness, the openness, the in between. It's like I've been working recently, to like reprogram myself in that way, to live more. I always say, live more in the gray scale, or like be more in the in between. Because I got this, like after, all of my Indiana drama, I got this
Indiana drama.
Yeah, sort of like
we should talk about Indiana because we can compare Indianapolis and Bloomington notes. That's right.
Yes.
Next time.
Yeah, we totally. Oh my God, I'm totally gonna call you. Like, we totally do. But I got this like kind of realization, Sangram, where I was like, oh yeah, like my work as a curator, like lives in the walls. It's like I'm not necessarily in the gallery. I'm in like the HVAC system. Like I'm in the plumbing, right? Right. Figuratively, but it's like a subversion, that sort of taints the well water, before anybody knows, right, that it's tainted. And it was like a really wonderful moment for me, because I've been struggling with like, basically like, why do these institutions hire me? Like knowing that this is, I'm very frank and, transparent in my color, about the work that I do. And it was like, oh, because again, there's no purview for them for it. And then I don't do it in like a traditional, or through a traditional like curatorial methodology.
Yeah.
And that was what I came up with. And so with that, I've been like, oh, how do I live more in the gray? How do I live in the walls of everything, that I do? And so again, like your work really like gives me a tangible, like visual image of what that could look like, not just as a professional, but as a person.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, I'm curious, what do you mean by living in the HVAC? Like, do you mean, I don't know if I understood what you were saying with that. Like, are you saying because you kind of create the environment and so all like the space itself is like, what did you mean by that?
Well, with the HVAC or like the plumbing analogy, it's like, oh, I hate to say it this way, but it is. It's like poison in the air. right, right, or like upsetting,
I see.
basically how white supremacy culture functions,
Right.
in the museum space,
Mhm.
so, but I do it, it's not one of those things where like I'm standing on a soapbox, right? With a
Right.
book,
Right.
you know
Right.
what I mean? It's like
Oh,
a,
I see what you're saying
see what
now.
I'm
Okay,
saying?
like working from within the system as
Yeah,
opposed to being a signpost outside
right.
telling people what to, do. Right.
Yeah,
I hear you.
yeah. I
Yeah,
always thought it was like super obvious until
right.
that situation, right? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe it's not as obvious as I think it is to most people.
Well, I think also this idea of grayness also comes with a cost, perhaps in some cases, but based on because it generates, if you're comfortable with ambiguity or the gray areas, or at least that's where you pull from. Doesn't mean that the work is gray or unclear, but I do think it. But there's a kind of tension that I think that happens in the work that is perhaps is more about asking questions, or it's not so much a statement as like a mirror almost. And I think that's what I care about, and I think the idea of looking at a painting, I think my favorite paintings are the paintings that when you really try to decode them, they fall apart in a certain way that you kind of have to come at it from different ways, and it makes the experience so much more dimensional. And I feel like, unfortunately, sometimes it's, when a painting functions kind of just as a visual equivalent of a soundbite, right? It's like, well, like that's, and could be totally fine for somebody else, but I think for me, I guess for me, I need something else, and
it's like I needed to trouble me,
yeah,
like just aesthetically,
yeah,
you can appreciate it,
yeah,
but it's like I needed to do something, right?
Where do you think that sits in the larger aesthetic and but also the general culture for you, as somebody who is, like you mentioned earlier, I may not be a maker, right, but you're constantly in dialogue with different types of makers and thinkers. How do you feel like that sense of being troubled or being willing to get into, embrace or live in that and even foster that, is, I'm curious, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think most of the people that I'm surrounded by like feel the same way, right? So we're always shocked, or I'm always shocked when I walk into spaces that are open to it, and that's what I find fascinating, actually, is like how I've been, I think, again, over the last like 7 years, like in these spaces that are completely not comfortable with it. Or meeting people, too, that are like completely not comfortable with it. And sometimes, I don't know, I think as a woman of color, so it's like both as a Black person and as a woman, it's kind of where I reside, almost like naturally, right? Kind of quote unquote. So it's something I think that's been inherent, right, to my worldview, or like my experience in life in general, right, that now has come into the work, I think, more sufficiently, like it's more obvious to me now, like, or I should say I'm more deliberate about it. And so that part, where like I can talk to some of, like, my white female colleagues, and I'm just like, how do you not, how do you not get that, right? Or like, how does that not change? And I'm just like, oh yeah, because like that was not how you were brought up, and like this has been a thing for me since I was like 6, and maybe it didn't necessarily become as obvious for them until they got to college, right? And
right.
fascinating to me, and
well,
tend to work together, you know, to
Yeah.
flush it out more. But yeah, it's more about the people, like how many people are like invested in not being troubled in, you know, in those ways. You know, that's the part that's super surprising.
And I think for a long time, I think there was a split for me between like, you know, the kind of the space I occupied as a maker and the kind of tradition that I pulled from, and which and you know, just kind of the byproduct of how everybody grows up the way they grow up. Like you have only so much control, right? Like and without kind of, you know, breaking that down into parts, I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about maybe over the last few years is, instead of thinking of like the sense of liminality or in betweenness as something that is like negative, but more as a positive, or something that actually creates openings for you know, it's like a challenge. Like, how do you make something that actually acknowledges that instead of covers that up or puts it to the side, right? Like, so there's not split between the aesthetic or the art part of yourself versus kind of how you feel generally in your day-to-day life, right? Like, and I think that's something that I feel like is kind of matters to me more, like bringing those things together, which is where I think the friction is useful. You know, that like I want that friction of that form on the left of the painting, you know, and I want the hair to be dislocated on the far left. There is a level of, I guess, detachment or violence or fracturing that is in the painting intentionally to kind of, you know, like a body has been kind of opened up into these different passages, and also, like, you know, questions like, well, why not, you know, and giving more credit to the viewer. Like I always kind of, I'm banking that, you know, like the viewer, like a viewer will connect, right? Like, so even like with you, one of the first things you said that, oh, I connected with it, like that to me is so much more meaningful. Is that it kind of, you know, like it's not that the painting wasn't diluted to satisfy it wasn't like what I call a painting by committee. It's like a little bit, you know, like at least, you know, that's something I'm always aware of. Anyway, that methodology. So yeah. Anyway.
Good. No, that was great. Adrian, I was checking. I knew it was 7. It was getting close. So
yeah, and I didn't want to stop the train of thought. I just wanted to give this gentle, like we're getting towards Q&A moment. I didn't want to stop that train of thought. I did want to ask, so I have a particular question about this painting that we're on, Sangram. And when you started to tell us like where it started, like where it came from, your daughter's pajamas, you were a little hesitant or like almost embarrassed. I don't want to overstate sort of like your emotion there. So I'm curious about, and like, I think, you know, I 100% relate to this idea of like starting from a bad idea. And I actually think that's like a really comfortable place to start, because then, you know, there's less at stake. So I'm curious about that mindset of like where, once you share that information with the audience, because there's one thing to start with a bad idea in your studio and kind of have that thought of like, this is a little cheesy or kitschy or whatever, but then to admit like, how do you think that might change the experience for you as like how it exists in the world, or for us as a viewer?
I think that is exactly why I probably did the painting, because at some point I was going to have to admit it. You know, like it's one thing to admit it in the painting or in the studio, and I could just not talk about it. But I feel like it's so obvious. It's like, you know, they're Christmas pajamas. I'm like, why not? You know, like, you know, I think there's too much. I think sometimes it's important for, at least I think, I don't really mind sharing what motivates the paintings, in all seriousness, because I think if anything, it's about giving yourself permission. And I feel like artists are always giving other artists permissions. And I feel like I'm always looking to art and my life for permissions to do different things, and like giving myself permission to do something. And being uncomfortable with if that was a good idea or not, I think is actually in the long term, I think for myself is a good move. And so having to admit on a Zoom call that those are my daughter's pajamas, I'm like, I don't care. That's totally fine with me, admitting that. Yeah, I think why not?
Yeah, I talk a lot
Anything can turn into something.
To my students, Adrian, about and Sangram, same thing. My students and the younger curators that I mentor, around the country. And I say it all the time, like you just have to give yourself the permission, because so many of them are like, just the things that they're experiencing is like so harrowing. And they're always like, Kelli, I don't feel like, I'm at that point in my career. And I was like, I wasn't either. Yeah. I wasn't at that point in my career. I just did it because I needed to do it for me.
Yeah.
And then just to see that shift, where it's like, again, like centering themselves is so foreign.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, so I'm trying to now here at Tufts, I'm trying to like build class on like self-autonomy, and like how to teach, stepping into it.
Yeah.
But no, totally, I think you're totally right about that. It's like just to, when, sometimes I'll say it's like the power of no, but it's like the power of like when you stop caring, when it really becomes about what matters to you, and as that authority figure. Yeah, it does. It shifts a lot for you.
So I want to start getting, oops, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Thanks.
I want to just make sure we have a chance to get to the audience questions, because I kind of cut the line there with my own. So I have a question, actually an anonymous attendee. So if anybody wants to claim credit to this, please do. You said that about 4 years ago, things started to recombine. It's very clear in your work, and I think I'm not the only one who finds the work of your last 4 years extraordinary. Could you talk about what might have helped you develop that shift? Any ideas about how an artist might accelerate or provoke it?
I feel like everyone works so differently. It's a hard thing for me to say. I think what helped me was that there was a period where I wasn't painting the figure, and people would say, "Oh, you stopped painting the figure," or whatever, and I never thought I did. Or when people thought I was working abstractly, and I thought, well, I'm not working abstractly. And so what somebody is doing in their head versus how it appears externally, there's often a disconnect. And I think for me, I just kind of like follow where the work leads, and when the path kind of stops, I kind of reevaluate. Or when something shifts in my life, I think the reason the figure came back into the work was honestly because, one, I was trying to find a way to bring it back in, but the way I had been doing prior didn't make sense anymore. Two, kind of a major shift in my personal life, having a daughter. That was like, it just kind of changes the role of a person, and it's like just that was a big thing. And then three was what was the upheaval in the world, like to kind of think about whether stuff around immigration that was happening, deportations and all of that, and just thinking back, I suppose, as an immigrant myself, like, when I moved here, that those were not issues I dealt with, but kind of have these like, how would I have gone through that, if that was the case for me, so it kind of like is a little jarring and anxiety causing, and like, even though it obviously directly didn't relate to me, I think so. I think that kind of and of course, stuff happening in terms of the killings. It's just like there was, I think, the anxiety, the kind of tension around the body, and visibility, and but at the same time, me looking for a way back in, I realized that working with maybe a way through for me would be to work with thinking about the figure more as a sign, and then that allows for more things to come in, almost like a shell, and then from painting to painting, maybe different things can happen. Maybe the figure is an anchor and not a person. Maybe the figure can be a body in one painting and a sign in another, and somebody who I know in another. Maybe I can move between the private conditions, and on another hand, I can think about, something totally different, like, yeah. So I think those are probably how I moved through it, or where, what I told myself would make the sense to me.
Sorry, of course, mute. This next question might relate to a bit of what you described of how the paintings evolved. This is a question from Meg Ricks. Could you give an example of your favorite paintings that, quote, can come apart in different ways, end quote?
Favorite paintings that can do that? That's a really good question. Well, I don't know if I would say favorite, but I guess, like, because the John show is up in a couple of places, I can kind of point to somebody. He's, I think, a really interesting person who seems to work with, with paintings kind of do that. Honestly, I don't know if I am thinking about painting when I'm making my paintings, to be totally frank. I'm not really thinking. I think I'm more thinking about, like, seeing something old against something new. I'm just like, like, I remember I used to always, like, when you take the subway, you see entire chunks of the wall is missing and the tiles have fallen apart. I think I just notice. I'm interested in time, and so for me, how it manifests in the world, and then it becomes a way to kind of gives me a kind of a way into how it releases into the painting. Yeah.
So I think you may have just answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just to see if it sort of elicits more of a response on that train of thought. Okay. This is from Sara Reisman, our chief curator. In a number of your paintings, there's a sense of an image form receding or emerging. Can you elaborate on where this sense of time comes from in your own experience? And then there's a parenthetical, not meant as a personal question, but in terms of who you are in the world.
Well, I think I referred to that condition a little bit, I think, during the conversation when I mentioned something about the ambivalence around visibility for myself, like both, where, like, how much of myself do I want visible in the painting? How much of my own background do I want to be explicit in the work? And that tension of wanting to fit versus wanting to, or fit in versus wanting to stand out, right? And I did it in a interview a couple of years ago. I said this thing that I think I think I would still say that is that, like, to me, one of the greatest privileges, I think, is to be able to disappear and not be, not have to, like, make yourself, just kind of, just, you just don't, people don't notice you, and, like, you get to choose when you want to be visible or not, right? But I think I think so much of, at least what I was thinking a lot about, whether it has to do with kind of just what's happening around the world. Maybe it's not directly referring to me. And the way I suppose I internalize it is thinking about expectations around who you, how you live in the world, right? Whether in terms of gender or sexual orientation or ethnicity and things like that. And the kind of like, oh, that the narrative that gets projected, and how you live in relation, or how you like how you act in relationship to that supposed narrative. So I think for me, this idea of receding and emerging is really a way for me to talk about that. Like sometimes I don't really, I want there to be a figure, but I don't feel like I have to paint all of it. I mean, in the most obvious sense, I would say like, I don't think I need to paint the whole figure. I think I can paint 3 things and that's enough. If I want to, like, and just like being like, this is what I want, this is what I don't want right now. And how do I make that work is a whole another issue. And that's a painting issue. But the thoughts are much more, I guess, coming out of my own personal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense, what I just said?
It does. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
and
you,
I do think
Sara.
it relates to so many other parts of the conversation, but it's nice to sort of get clarity on that specific point.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a question from Mark Richmond. If a painting reflects a you that's a step ahead of what you're aware of or thinking about, how might the act of creating propel the process? Do you think the end result reflects a mini evolution, a development that played out during the particular painting episode?
I'm reading it because like I have it open here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess a short answer to that question, I suppose, is a yes. Yeah, it takes a while, I suppose, to figure that out. But I can sense when something works that was not planned, that I hadn't done before, and that doesn't have necessarily a visual parallel in my brain. So like when it's like, oh, this is how I wanted it to feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but I don't want to. It's like, but I don't want to like, but I want to do it in a way. Yeah, like how do I paint something the way it feels in my brain, right? Or and because I'm not gauging it against another painting, like I think maybe not for everyone, but at least for me, the way I developed as an artist is really about painting in conversation with painting. It took a long time for me to be okay with not making paintings that look like other good paintings in a certain sense, because I don't really claim kind of a proto-European tradition as mine. It just doesn't, like I'm not interested in being the next X whatever, I'm not interested in hero worship or what, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think for me it was like, but then it's like, well, what do you want then? I think the question then it's like, that's the question that to me is often what drives the thinking and the just everything that happens around the work, the research and the reading, or et cetera, right? Like, so that that's why I said, I'm not really looking at painting. I might be thinking about something I read an artist wrote. I might be thinking about an interview I read, or I might be thinking, if I'm thinking anything about an artist, it might just be a sensation, like remembering looking at a painting, but I don't go look up the painting. I just try to remember, like, what did it feel like when I saw that painting? And it could be completely false. It could be, maybe I didn't even see that in the painting. But I think those sensations are important for me, because those are the things that feel real, and those are the things that I'm trying to, I guess, bring into the work. If I still remember it, then it means it made some kind of a through line in my thinking.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about a physical representation of a feeling in general, and sort of that challenge in itself. And then add on top of that, the painting challenge of, trying to make a good painting. Here's a question from Andrew Genzel. Sangram, do you feel your paintings function as talismans for perception beyond their visual and material presence, as well as for things that cannot be seen?
Man, what do you, I feel like I need some follow-up comment from Andrew on that one. What do you mean by talismans for perception?
Okay, well, let's stand by, see if we get a follow-up.
Maybe, yeah, maybe Andrew will follow up with a follow-up thought. I guess I'm trying to think if I can answer this. I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that question.
Okay, so Andrew, if you're still listening, let us know if you've got a follow-up to clarify. I'm gonna move to another question from Sara Reisman. Interesting to think about Sangram's idea of giving himself permission and Kelly's point about how many people are comfortable not troubling certain kinds of spaces. Both of you are talking about agency. What agency has the last year and a half given you to do the work you are meant to do?
Kelly, do you want to take that first?
Like, what agency? I feel like for me, it was very little threat. It was very literally threat, right? It was death threats, you know, the threat of being fired, you know, the threat of not knowing, you know, what COVID was in quarantine, like we just not knowing what that was gonna do. I took this whole kind of like, you know, life is short kind of thing, you know, like life is short, what are you waiting for? But it was also like life is short and people are being hurt, you know, and this is the art world, not the CIA, you know. So I just, I kind of like, and I mean, it was a minute. It was technically, if I'm being totally honest, it was about 6 weeks, you know, where I was like trying to like I was in the mirror, like as my sister and I like to say, clapping myself up, you know, like getting up the bravery and the courage to just do it, and to say something publicly, you know, about, you know, not only what was happening, but like about the work, you know, that my colleagues and I were doing. It was an urgency, I think, Sarah, I think more so than agency, you know, where maybe I should say like an urgency to assert the agency, you know, where I think I'd been doing it, you know, over my career. But yeah, last year and a half, you know, it was just like, okay, like it's kind of go time, you know, like I have to do it, you know, much more deliberately now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would say that for me, the last year and a half was interesting in the sense, or I was much more, and I don't mean to say it in the way that like it sounds like I was detached from what was going on, but in terms of my life, like we moved right before the pandemic to Baltimore, and then from Brooklyn after, you know, even though I'd been teaching at where I was teaching for the last 18 years at Maryland Institute, and because my wife was starting a new program at Hopkins. Anyway, so it was like a lot, like she's in school, I'm teaching, and then Zoom universe begins, and then there's all of that. I think I just was trying to carve out some time as much as I could to go into the studio and just be there. I tried to, as much as I could, try to remove any expectation, any external expectations for the work. I was like, I'm just gonna, like the work I had done right before that, I did a couple of shows. I'm like, okay, what's the next step? Like, what do I do now? It was really a kind of it felt, and I feel like I said this a few times to some different people. I think I made fewer work in the last 2 years, but I feel like everything I did, I feel like I can stand behind. Then sometimes there have been years where I've made a lot of work, and it's like, you know, if half of them got burnt, I probably wouldn't even remember what those paintings were that got burnt. You know, so I guess I was just more present in each of those paintings, and the paintings individually mattered to me, and it was, I feel, I guess in many ways lucky and privileged to have had whatever little time here and there I could find to carve that out. And there was, you know, it was like the world closed in. It was very close, and time was very fractured, but it was also very, there wasn't anything else to do. You know, it was very like, in some ways, it was like, you know, make dinner for the family, you know, there was just like, there wasn't a lot of art world, like you mentioned, Kelly. I wasn't thinking about the art world, you know, well, you know, unless I'm on Instagram, and then I have to like go, you know, do some breathing exercises after Instagram. But beyond that, you know, it was the anxiety of that, but then there was like, when in the studio, I was just able to just kind of be there, you know, which was really nice. And, you know, and I think it was a good lesson for me, which I think I talked to a lot of friends and they felt similarly, you know, that it's just kind of, things slowed down. I guess what I'm trying to get at is a lot of like things slowed down, and in a way I allowed myself to slow down, which I think was helpful.
So we did get a follow-up from Andrew.
Oh,
did you see it?
Hold on.
He says, as in the seeing, really seeing your daughter's pajamas. So I'll reread his question for everybody. But
okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do you feel your paintings function as talismans for perception beyond their visual and material presence, as well as for things that cannot be seen?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I would say so, because I think in a way in many ways how artists, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's always true for everyone, but I feel like that's one of the great things art can do, is that it can show us things we've seen a million times, but show them in a way that kind of reorients our thinking. And so from then on, whenever we experience that, it comes with it, you know, like it kind of pivots things a bit. So I try to be open to those kinds of experiences that can move back and forth between my kind of art brain or the studio brain and then my everyday brain, you know, and I try to be open to those things. So yeah, I definitely would agree with that for sure.
Thank you, Andrew, for clarifying and giving us a chance to answer that question properly. I'm actually going to call it here. Thank you so much for joining us, Sangram. Before we officially leave you, I just want to remind everybody that this series is ongoing every week until November 30th. So next week, you can join us for a conversation with Marlon Blackwell and our Chief Curator, Sara Reisman. You can RSVP via our website under the events portion of the website, or via the Out of Many website under conversations. So RSVP as you did for this one. And I also want to make a little call out, because Kelly mentioned some of the things that came up in a previous conversation that I had with her that was that's in an interview that lives on the website. So to get a little bit more information on the Indianapolis situation that she just kind of alluded to but didn't go into, you can find that interview on our website, nationalacademy.org. We may have just dropped that chat yes, we did. We dropped the link. Thanks, Angelique. We dropped the link in the chat. So please check that out. So thank you again, Sangram. Thank you, Kelly. This was a really great conversation. And for everybody who either have a friend that missed it or you want to watch it again, we will have it on our website. The recorded whole conversation will be there by early next week, if not the end of this week. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Adrian, for all the work. And Kelly, it was great meeting you and chatting. Looking forward to future conversations.
Yeah,
thank you, everyone, for joining and also your questions. Bye, everyone.